It's hard to fully grasp just how hard the 2024-25 New York Rangers fell. A team loaded with skill, experience, and expectations, a team coming off a President's Trophy season and a trip to the Eastern Conference Final, a team that brought back its core with Panarin, Zibanejad, Fox, Kreider, Shesterkin, and added proven veterans like Reilly Smith to round out one of the deepest rosters in the league. By late November, they were 12-4-1, near the top of the NHL, and still being mentioned as a legitimate Stanley Cup contender, and then the bottom fell out. This is the story of the New York Rangers' historic collapse in 2025, and how they did something rarely seen in hockey history, which was miss the playoffs after winning the President's Trophy. Going into the season, GM Chris Kreider didn't blow anything up, and why would he? The Rangers had finished the previous year with 114 points, and were 2 games away from the Stanley Cup final. Coach Peter Laviolette was retained, the leadership core was untouched, and most of the major players were still in place. Drury's moves were minimal, like there was Reilly Smith from the Penguins to add some experience and middle 6 scoring. Will Cooley had emerged as a potential top 6 contributor after a solid bottom 6 role on the Rangers the year prior, and the depth seemed solid on the team. Laviolette's hybrid zone system had been fully implemented and everything looked smooth. By mid-November, this team appeared machine-like. Clean exits, smart neutral zone play, strong suppression of high danger chances, Panarin was flying, the power play was around 25%, and Shesterkin was saving everything. For a while it worked, but the cracks were already there, small at first, then growing. Even during the winning stretch, there were warning signs. The power play was volatile. When it clicked, it looked like a top 5 unit, but when it didn't, it stagnated quickly. Perimeter passing, telegraphed one-timers, no movement in the bumper slot. Teams began to cheat towards Panarin's side, daring the Rangers to create from the net front or the right wall, and they couldn't. Zibanejad wasn't producing at his usual clip. His shot totals were down, his transition speed, never elite, was now a liability. Meanwhile, Jonathan Quick, who had overachieved the year prior, began to show his age. Laviolette started overusing Shesterkin, and the fatigue wasn't visible yet, but it was coming. And then the biggest shock yet, the team traded its captain, Jacob Trouba, in December. After the team had went on a skid in late November, on December 6th, the Rangers traded Jacob Trouba to the Anaheim Ducks in exchange for Urho Vaikanainen and a 4th round pick. He wasn't just benched or scratched, but he was traded. Captain was gone just months after the Rangers had won the President's Trophy. For a team less than 25 games into the season and on pace for over 100 points, this was virtually unprecedented. Trouba had his critics, especially after a rough playoff run, but moving her captain that early in the year sent a jarring message that no one is safe. Worse yet, Trouba had previously blocked a trade to Detroit via his no-trade clause. The public didn't know it at the time, but a leaked internal memo had listed both Trouba and Chris Kreider as potential trade candidates as early as late November, and that was during the 12-4-1 stretch. The clubhouse was shaken, the fan base was confused, and the trust between the front office and locker room was fractured. After the Trouba trade, the Rangers became wildly inconsistent. They struggled to string together even 2 wins at a time. From January through early March, they never won 3 games in a row. For a team with their talent, that's just not a slump, that's complete failure. The power play completely bottomed out, around 15% from mid-January through late March. Their 5-on-5 play wasn't much better. They were 28th in shot attempts, around 43% expected goals for. Their identity disappeared. Were they a counterattack team, a cycle team, a trap team? Nobody seemed to know. Coaching again remained static. Drury made one last push. On January 30th, he pulled the trigger on a blockbuster. Former Ranger JT Miller would be returning with Eric Brandstrom and Jackson Dorrington. In exchange, Filipino and Victor Mancini, as well as a conditional 1st round pick, were traded to Vancouver. At face value, the move made sense. Miller brought edge, offense, and experience. Brandstrom was a depth piece. Chytil had struggled to stay healthy, but what it did tactically was unclear. Miller slotted in as a top 6 center and was a 100-point player the year prior, but the team still had glaring issues. Later, the Rangers would also acquire Carson Soucy and Nicholas Aube-Kubel, but these were bottom 6 and 3rd pairing additions, and by the time they arrived, the team had already lost ground in the playoff race, and emotionally, they were spent. It was also a very confusing move to get Carson Soucy, who is still owed a lot of money, and is probably worse than 6 other defensemen on the team. As the Rangers dropped further down in the standings, the coaching remained stubbornly the same. Peter Laviolette, a veteran coach with over 20 years of NHL experience, was brought in to bring structure and discipline to a team that often played in chaotic spurts under previous leadership, and early on that structure worked. They won the President's Trophy in his first year, and made it to Game 6 of the Eastern Conference Finals. But as adversity mounted, Laviolette seemed either unwilling or unable to adapt. The team's neutral zone strategy was figured out by opponents in the second half of the season, their defensive breakouts came painfully slow, and the reliance on the defensemen to activate on every transition left them vulnerable to odd man rushes. The cycle game stalled, the offensive zone strategy relied heavily on point shot with minimal net front presence, and when asked about solutions, Laviolette repeated the mantra, execution. And maybe it's not entirely on Laviolette. A lot of players were regressing. Vincent Trocheck, while not bad, was not the same as he was the previous year. Chris Kreider, who'd been a very solid player for all of his career, barely had any assists last year. and a lot of young players like Alexis Lafreniere took a step back. And Laviolette rarely adjusted his line combinations for more than a period at a time. The top six remained largely unchanged for a while, even when Miller struggled to find chemistry with Panarin or Zibanejad. Younger players like Lafreniere were stuck in undefined roles, caught between development and deployment, and key matchups were repeatedly lost due to ineffective line matching, especially at home. Eventually, Zibanejad would be moved over to winger with Miller, and they did seem to play a little bit better. But again, this wasn't just a coaching failure in tactics, it was a failure in reading the emotional temperature of the room. The locker room was silent when it needed direction, the bench was quiet when it needed fire, and the players looked confused when they needed clarity, and Laviolette, for all his experience, gave them none. At some point, even your best players can't carry the weight. Igor Shesterkin, for the first few months, looked like himself again, save percentage around .920, top 10 in goals saved above expected, and completely masking the Rangers' defensive breakdowns. But once the team's structure collapsed, Shesterkin was left to fend for himself. By late February, his workload was unsustainable. Laviolette had leaned heavily on him all season, especially with quick faltering, and while Shesterkin wouldn't admit it, the numbers told the story. From February 15th to March 25th, his save percentage dropped below .900, his GSA-X was negative, he was overplaying angles, sliding early, and giving up second and third chances, signs of both fatigue and mental burnout. This wasn't regression, it was just survival mode, and it finally caught up to him. This was also after he got a record contract as a goaltender. Shesterkin barely had any support from his defense, the system didn't protect the high slot, puck management from the forwards was poor, and as the losing piled up, the pressure mounted. He started pressing, chasing pucks he'd normally let come to him, and when his game faltered, the team followed him into a collapse. By the final weeks of the season, the Rangers were still in the playoff race, but they were quickly faltering. They had stretches where they looked better, including in the beginning of 2025, but as time went on, games they would have closed out turned into third period collapses. Multi-goal leads in the third against teams like the Ducks and Senators cost them valuable points. The power play continued to stagnate, defensive miscues happened regularly, and the structure was gone. The Rangers, even when they were playing poorly and recovered for a little bit, they were in a wildcard spot for some time. Betting odds had them as more likely to make the playoffs, and MoneyPuck had them at over a 60% chance to make the playoffs at points. But again, collapses like this and not beating teams they should have beat led to their demise. The Rangers were officially eliminated from playoff contention on April 12th after a 3-1 loss to the Carolina Hurricanes. There was no explosive locker room moment, no final push, no real explanation. The team just kind of died. Looking back, this was never just a bad stretch. It was just a complete breakdown in organizational alignment. Front office that leaked internal trade lists for multiple leaders, including Trouba and Kreider mid-season, and then followed through on only one of these moves. Coaching staff that failed to adjust its system and then failed to motivate or connect with its players once the structure crumbled. A locker room that lost its identity the moment its captain was traded and never found a new one. A team with individual talent that, in the end, played as 20 disconnected parts. The Rangers had the experience and the talent, but they lacked leadership, clarity, and the ability to adapt when it mattered. They did what only 3 teams ever did in NHL history. They missed the playoffs as the reigning President's Trophies winners. Hockey season is right around the corner. I'm recording this on September 6th, so at this point we're around a month away. And going into this season, GM Chris Drury has already moved Kreider, who's been with the team for well over a decade. He was traded to the Ducks, which seems to be the location all former Rangers go. Defenseman Keandre Miller was traded to a division rival in the Hurricanes, and Laviolette was let go and replaced with former Penguins coach Mike Sullivan. Panarin, Zibanejad, Fox, Shesterkin are still there. Vladislav Gavrikov was added to stabilize the defense, and young players like Brett Berard, Brennan Othman, and Gabe Perreault are expected to get more playing time and hopefully develop in the right direction. It's hard to predict what this team will do because they still do have talent, but it all depends on how the veterans bounce back, or if they bounce back at all, and if the young talent can actually develop. As a Rangers fan, this was maybe the most disappointing season I've ever watched. Yeah, they had some bad years, especially in the late 2010s and early 2020s, but they weren't expected to be good. This team was expected to be a contender, and for the first quarter of the season or so, it looked like they were a contender, and then they collapsed and it just seemed like they didn't care. So going into the season, I'm hopeful they can at least make the playoffs. I don't think they're a real contender. I'm hoping that the young talent does develop, but I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. If you're a Rangers fan, what do you expect to happen? If you're not a Rangers fan, what do you think of them with your outside perspective? And also, if you did enjoy this, be sure to subscribe, like, and comment, as it really helps me out. This is only my second video on the channel. I want to make more videos like this covering current NHL news as well as historical things. So thank you for watching Hockey Domain, and be sure to subscribe.